Hello my friends, long time no talk. My name is Allison if you are new here, and I am a school librarian currently living and working in Austria. And welcome back to my channel. As I mentioned, it has been a minute since I have posted anything, and this is not even like I made videos and have just been too lazy to edit them or upload them. I literally have not thought about making a video in a while for a couple of reasons. So in Austria, the school year goes a little bit longer than it does in the United States. My school year ended on July 8th, and at that point in time, I immediately flew to London to go to Yalk and spend a couple of days in the UK. And when I got back, which was about a week ago, I just then finally let myself really relax and settle into summer vacation. So I had basically a week of doing just about nothing, which is not helped by the fact that it has been approximately 1 million degrees in Europe. I don't know, hopefully you can't tell, but I'm literally already sweating, and I just started making this video. Europe does not believe in air conditioning, which is a topic for another day. So anyway, apologize if I look visibly sweaty on camera. I know my hair is a little bit crazy and all over the place, but at this point I've just kind of given up and let the humidity take over. Anyway, that's beside the point. The point is that even though it is already almost the end of July and it's possible that this video may not even go up until August, I did want to do a couple of mid-year reflection things. And so the first one that I want to do is just talk about what I read in the second quarter of the year, so April, May, and June. In previous videos, well, in one previous video, I had decided I was going to do a quarterly wrap-up instead of a monthly wrap-up, and I talked about every single one of the books that I read in quarter one, and that was a very long video, and not many people watched it, and that's fine. But I decided I wanted to once again change things up. You know, my YouTube channel is still pretty new. I'm still figuring out what works best for me and experimenting with what I really want to do on this channel. That's another tangent, but I decided that at the end of each quarter, instead of recapping every single book that I have read, I want to give some overall stats for the quarter to see how they match up with the goals that I had initially set for myself, and talk about some of my favorites of that quarter. And I'm still going to do a full recap of what I thought of every book I read on my blog, so I will link that post in the description below if you want to hear my thoughts on all of the books I read this quarter. But enough talking, let's just jump right in. So, in the second quarter of the year, so in April, May, and June of 2022, I read 72 books, which, if you watched my first quarter wrap-up, you know I read 56 books. So that is a pretty big jump, and I'm kind of proud of myself for reading that many things. So breaking it down by age category, only 10 of the books were middle grade, 24 were adult, and 38 were young adult, which tracks with my history. I tend to read mostly young adult. I'm surprised I hadn't read more middle grade though, because I have been getting more into that this year. So one of my reading goals for 2022 is to make sure I'm reading at least 50% books by authors of color, so Black authors, Indigenous authors, and authors from other marginalized communities. For this quarter, I read 32 books by authors who are Black, Indigenous, or other people of color, and that came out to 44% of the total books that I read. So that is a bit under the 50% goal, and when I looked at the total number of books I've read so far this year, including July books, I am at 47%, so I do still have a bit of work to do to get up to that 50% threshold. And I know those numbers aren't the be-all and end-all, but I do want to make sure that I am reading from a wide variety of diverse communities. Additionally, I read 28 books by queer authors, with the disclaimer that I'm only counting people who I know are publicly out about their sexuality or gender identity, and that is 39% of the books that I read in this quarter. Again, I would like to see that number be higher, but it's decent. When we come to the genre breakdown, I did have some goals around the specific genres that I wanted to read or read more of, and I'm gonna be completely honest with you, I did not do that great when it came to those. So for sci-fi, I read 3 sci-fi books, and that actually keeps me on track for reading 12 sci-fi books this year, which I want to do. I read 9 fantasy books. I don't remember how many I read in Q1, so I'm not sure how on track I am in terms of meeting my goal of reading 30 fantasy books, but I was pretty satisfied with reading 9, although in my head I felt like I read more, so I have to work on that. Historical fiction, I read 1 historical fiction book, and you know, that's about normal for me, but I'm not happy about it because I am trying to read more. I read 5 graphic novels, but 4 of them were the Heartstopper novels because I wanted to read all of them before the series came out. So, I mean, it's still good. It's still 5 graphic novels, but not a lot of variety in graphic novel content. And then I only read 1 nonfiction book, which does not help keep me on track for, I believe my goal was also 12 nonfiction books. I was hoping to read at least 1 a month. I am failing at that. I think I've read maybe 2 or 3 total this year. I need to really get on top of the nonfiction content. And another thing I just wanted to throw in for this particular video, because I read a lot this month, was rereads. So this month I actually reread 7 books, and a couple of those were comfort rereads. So, you know, in the United States, there was some pretty devastating political news in the month of June, which did not make me super happy, and I turned to a few of my favorite books for comfort. So I reread Red, White, and Royal Blue and Simon versus the Homo Sapiens Agenda, which both did provide me with a little bit of comfort, although did not take away the reality of the fact that, you know, women have lost bodily autonomy in the country, but that is, again, a tangent. I also reread all 3 of the books in the Summer I Turned Pretty trilogy by Jenny Han before her series came out, and here's the thing. I love Jenny Han. I love her to death. I think that she is an absolutely wonderful person. The Lara Jean trilogy is one of my all-time favorite series in young adult history. I do not like The Summer I Turned Pretty. When I read it initially, back, I don't know. I know that I didn't read it as soon as it came out, but I'm pretty sure that the 3rd book wasn't out yet when I did start reading the series, so I feel like I read it close to its initial publication, and I feel like it is a product of its time in terms of YA trends. But I honestly, I know I might get some hate for this. I don't think a lot of people actually watch my videos to provide that hate, but I despise the love triangle in that book, and I hate that it is essentially 3 books of love triangle. And I didn't remember all of the things that happened in the 3rd book, and I'm not going to get into details here, but it is like bonkers, off the wall, ridiculous, and I could not believe what happened in that book. And I realized, like, reading it now, many years after I initially read it, when I have more, not just knowledge of YA books in general, but also like knowledge about human development and teenagers and blah blah blah, and I understand that some of the things that happened were absolutely like trauma responses because terrible things happened to the characters in that book. But anyway, I remembered not having great opinions about the books when I initially read them, and rereading them confirmed that, and I do not feel the need to ever reread them again. I do still want to watch the series just because, like, I want to support things that Jenny Han does, and I think that even if I didn't love the books, the adaptation could still be a really great standing on its own TV thing, but I really did not need the experience of rereading those books. And the other reread was the first Heartstopper book, the first Heartstopper graphic novel, which I had initially read like before it came out in the US, but hadn't touched the other one, so I wanted to read that one before diving into the other 3. So the reason that I wanted to include that statistic about rereads in this wrap-up statistics video is because I do want to talk about some of my favorite books from the quarter, and I'm not going to include any of those rereads in this little section about my favorites because aside from the Summer I Turned Pretty books, it's sort of implied that if I reread them, they're already kind of on my favorites list. So anyway, now that we've talked about the boring numbers stuff, let's get into some of the standout books that I read this past quarter. So first and foremost, I finally read the Nevermore series by Jessica Townsend, The Trials of Morgan Crow, and the two that come after that. I don't remember the titles, but I will put pictures up here somewhere. This is possibly the most charming middle grade fantasy series I have ever run into, and I cannot tell you how much I adored it. Like, I don't know what else to say other than if you haven't read it yet, don't be like me and read it as soon as you can. I just thought that the world that was created was so whimsical and vibrant, and the characters were just really fun to get to know. I have to tell you that I love Jupiter North with my entire heart, and I would not mind at all if like a 35 to 45-year-old man resembling Jupiter North and his personality just like popped up in Austria and wanted to go out for coffee. That's a tangent. Anyway, I devoured them. I think I read all three in 3 days, and I am eagerly anticipating the fourth book, which comes out in the fall. So those were absolutely at the top of my favorites for this past quarter's reading. Also, the one historical fiction book that I read this quarter did make this list, and that is We Are Not Free by Tracy Chee. I mean, shouldn't really be surprising as it was the National Book Award, I think finalist. I don't think it won, but it has obviously received plenty of acclaim and plenty of just anecdotal positive reviews as well. I generally avoid World War II historical fiction like the plague because I personally, this is one of my greatest pet peeves with historical fiction, and I know I've said it before, so I apologize for repeating myself over and over again, but there is so much more to history aside from those 4 years in which World War II took place, and please, authors, write about other stuff. However, I give this one a pass because it is about the incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II, written by a Japanese American author, and it was so well done. I read this during Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, and I did a reading vlog in which I went into more detail on my thoughts about this book. So if you want to know more about what I thought, you can watch that vlog, and I will link it up here, wherever, somewhere up there. So I don't want to talk too much more about it, but it is outstanding. It did make me cry. If you haven't read it, you should, even if you, like me, do not like historical fiction, particularly of the World War II variety. Next favorite. Again, this probably isn't a surprise because it's getting a lot of love on the Bookternet, and that is Delilah Green Doesn't Care by Ashley Herring Blake. It doesn't seem to matter what age category Ashley Herring Blake writes in. She's going to write amazing queer books, no matter what. Like, I first read her YA books, and like, I liked them. I read her middle grade books, and I adored them, and I think Delilah Green Doesn't Care is my all-time favorite book that I have read by her. Delilah is just such a fun character. This is a queer romance. It involves the single-parent trope. I don't know if I would necessarily say it's also Grumpy Sunshine, but I think Delilah could definitely be considered grumpy. And I think that there's just so much good like stuff about families and friendships and finding your people in the world and all of that, in addition to the romance, which is like the perfect amount of steamy, I think, and it was fantastic. I loved it. If you are a romance reader, or even if you aren't, you should read Delilah Green Doesn't Care. Next, I want to talk about the Rockton series by Kelly Armstrong, which is another thing that is really not up my alley normally, but a friend of mine who also likes to read, we have incredibly different tastes in books, but she's been telling me that her favorite author is Kelly Armstrong for a while, and when she told me about this series, I was like, that actually sounds like something I might like. Basically, the main character has this event in her past that is not great, that she's sort of been running from her entire life, and her best friend is also in a not great situation that she needs to escape from, and they find out about this location that is this sort of secret city in the wilderness of Canada where you can go if you need to escape a bad situation, whether that's if you are on the run from someone dangerous or if you have committed a white-collar crime and need to hide out for a little while. And so something happens that precipitates the process of them moving there. And the main character, she is a police officer in real life, and the sheriff of the secret town really doesn't want her, but they've just had their first murder in town and he needs an actual qualified police officer, so that's the condition of her being able to come to the secret town, is that she has to help solve this murder. As that book and the series go on, you find out about things that have been going on in the town that are kind of shady, and maybe the residents haven't been getting the full picture of what things are really like, and as a result there's more crimes to solve because it's a mystery series. But I really like that it was a good portion of it is solving the mysteries, but then there's also the survival in the wilderness aspect, which even though that's not my thing at all, I literally despise camping, and we could talk about that for a while, but we're not going to. I like being in the outdoors, but I would never want to live off the grid with no electricity in a place that's cold 9 months of the year or whatever. But I really like the survival element in books. So again, this was another series. There are 7 books and I blew through them. I read the whole series in a week, and she's writing kind of a spin-off series featuring some of the same main characters in a new location, and I am when is 2023 gonna happen? When can I have this book? Please give me more. So again, if you are an adult mystery reader and you haven't checked out the Rockton series, would recommend. Then I wanted to talk about This Wicked Fate by Kailyn Barron, which is the sequel to This Poison Heart, the secret garden cottagecore Greek myth fantasy of everyone's queer dreams. The sequel was so outstanding. It really got more into how Greek mythology really tied into this story, and there was just so much queer goodness. And aside from that, the main characters need to go on a quest, which is another thing that I absolutely love in books. So I would love, I know this is just a duology, but I would love if Kailyn Barron kept writing more books in this world because I think they're so great. But it did wrap up nicely and I felt satisfied with the conclusion to the series. Then another favorite is Alice Austen Lived Here by Alex Gino, which honestly 2022 has been such an outstanding year for queer middle grade books, and this is no exception. Alice Austen Lived Here features 2 non-binary main characters, and they're living on Staten Island. If you don't know that much about New York City, Staten Island is the red borough. There's a lot of conservative beliefs, there's a lot of bigotry. It's just maybe not the best borough to live in if you are growing up as a queer kid. And the main character is really lucky in that they have a slightly older queer mentor living in their apartment building who is really a good friend and helpful and helps them in learning queer history. And so they have a history project in school where they have to write an essay about someone important in Staten Island's history, and the winner of the project is going to get a statue in front of Borough Hall. And through this project, the main character and their partner learn about Alice Austen, who's a queer person who lived in Staten Island in, I think, the late 1800s, maybe early 1900s, I don't remember exactly. And they decide to write about her for their project. And I think that this is such a great look at the importance of queer history, which is something that, of course, gets left out of most of the US history curriculum. Shocking. And, you know, I lived on Staten Island for 3 years, and I knew about the Alice Austen house. Like, it's a museum there, and you can learn about her life. But even then, like, living there and knowing that she existed, I didn't know that she was queer until I read this book. I didn't know that Audre Lorde had spent time on Staten Island until I read this book. I had a Twitter exchange with Alex Gino after reading this about queer history and like how different our lives would be if we actually learned these things when we were younger, and it just, this book is so important. It needs to be on all library shelves, and I think that you should hand it to any middle grade kid you know, regardless of how they identify, because we need windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors, as the great Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop has said. And gosh, I don't know how much more I can say other than read it. You will love it. It's so important. But more than that, it's an excellent story. And also, it's really short. It's only like 176 pages, so it's great for kids who don't want long books. I'm going to stop gushing about Alice Austen Lived Here because, believe it or not, I still have like 6 more favorites from this month because listen, I read 72 books in those 3 months, so I'm allowed to have 12 favorites. The next one is another queer middle grade. It's called Ellen Outside the Lines by A.J. Sass. It has a lesbian main character who is also autistic and Jewish. So it's a great intersectional novel, and it's also just a really fun book because the main character is on a trip to Barcelona, Spain with her classmates, and their learning experience is to go on this scavenger hunt. And if you know anything about me and the things that I love in books, visiting foreign countries and scavenger hunts are absolutely 2 things at the top of this list. And it's really interesting because although Ellen is cisgender, she meets a non-binary classmate for the first time, and it sort of really challenges her opinions of like things that are binary or black and white, which as a person who is autistic, she often thinks in binaries, and so this sort of challenges her worldviews and allows her to grow, and it's really interesting to see that process as she experiences a number of new things in Spain. And just her scavenger hunt group is just so fun and such a good group. So anyway, again, I loved it, would recommend. Then I have another romance novel that I really liked, which is called Built to Last by Erin Hahn, and I just found that the banter in this book was great. I laughed so much, which is important to me in a rom-com. Like, I want more than just romance, I want comedy. I read this, I think in April. I read it a really long time ago, so I don't have a lot of thoughts other than when I was scrolling through Goodreads to pick out books I wanted to talk about in this video, it stood out to me as one that I really wanted to talk about. So, even though I haven't given you a lot of information, I still think that you should know that Built to Last is a really good romance. Then I wanted to talk about Leah and Beckett's Abracadabra, which I foolishly did not write the author's name down, and I will put a picture of the book up here. So there it is, there's the author. I'm sorry I forgot your name. This is a book that I 100% did not expect to be on a favorites list because the main character does magic, which is not in a fantasy way, like is a magician, does magic tricks, which is not a thing that I am normally into. Like, I just don't care about it. But this is such like an interesting feminist perspective that came out of nowhere and blew me away. Like, I actually read this book for review for a professional publication, so like I figured I was, you know, reading it to point out its positive and negative aspects to be published in this journal, but I was not expecting to really, really love it. The spotlight that it shone on the sexism in the world of magicians and how for so long it was thought that women could not be anything more than assistants in magic shows, and how often they were erased from the history of magic tricks, just as women have been erased from most of the rest of history. I don't know if you're sensing a theme in some of my favorite books, but anyway, this was really more of an enemies to lovers romance, which is, again, not my favorite, but I didn't hate it. So, again, that was something that was really unexpected, and I really enjoyed it. Then I read In Deeper Waters by F.T. Lukens, and this is one that I feel like pirate books, to me, can sort of go either way, and this wasn't necessarily a pirate book like I was expecting, but there is a lot of adventure and action, and I just thought the romance was really cute and the action was really interesting. So, again, I feel like it's a good one to go into not knowing too much, because then you can just like enjoy things as they unfold, so I don't want to say too much. And also, I read it a long time ago, so I don't remember all of the details, but I found it to be like delightful and charming and not too stressful, which I feel like some adventure stories can be. And honestly, I know that this author came out with another book, I think this year, and I, for some reason, had it in my head that this was like a sequel or a companion to In Deeper Waters, and I was so excited. When I found out that it wasn't, it broke my heart, because I want so much more of those characters. And I feel like that is always the mark of a good book to me, when like you don't want to leave the characters behind because you've enjoyed getting to know them so much. Anyway, 2 more books to talk about and then we are done. A Magic Steeped in Poison by Judy Eileen was a wonderful fantasy with a very unique magic system based on tea. And I just thought the concept was really interesting, something that didn't feel done over and over again in fantasy novels. So I really enjoyed that. I felt like that concept was interesting, but then like it was backed up with the plot. The plot kept things moving along and had enough action to keep me satisfied, and was just generally a good fantasy story. This book is also a duology. The second one comes out in August. I actually was able to read it already, and while I felt like there was a satisfying conclusion to the series, I did kind of want a little bit more from it, but that doesn't change my opinion about the first book, which stuck in my mind enough that it is on this favorites of the quarter list. And the final book I want to talk about as a standout of quarter 2 is Ignite the Stars by Maura Milan, which came out a couple of years ago, and during Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, I was finally feeling in the mood for sci-fi, and I had happened to bring my old ARC copy of this here with me to Austria, so I decided to dive in. And let me tell you how much I love the main character in this book. She is just such a badass, and I loved her so much, and I just loved every moment of action in this story. Of course, I enjoyed the criticism of colonialism that came up, as often does when we are in space operas. There was just a lot to love. I will say that I also read the sequel during the quarter, and that made me want to punch someone, but that's okay. That doesn't change the fact that Ignite the Stars does belong on this list. So, with that, those were the standout books that I read during April, May, and June of 2022. I truly hope that when we get to the end of quarter 3, at the end of September, I will be more efficient about getting this wrap-up style video up before, the end of the next month. But we'll see how it goes. I know that it's already almost the end of July, possibly even August, depending on when I get this up. But if you would like to tell me it's one of your standout books during the months of April, May, and June in the comments, I would love to hear it. Otherwise, I will see you next time.